New national chief calls for reparations for Indigenous people. BC First Nation says there are more than 160 unmarked graves found. This is the Grey White North Report. Alright, so a couple of days ago, the Sxwithul'txw tribe notifies neighboring communities of a discovery, and the Catholic Diocese issues an apology. Now, this is the Cupper Island Residential School. It operated from 1890 to 1970, and they said they found more than 160 undocumented, unmarked graves in the area, which was once home to the Cupper Island Residential School. So again, I called it. We're going to find more graves. Every residential school will probably have will have graves. Bet on that. So no further details were provided. The tribe did not say how the graves were found, whether the children's remains are suspected of being buried there, or whether ground-penetrating radar was used. So they're not sure. Have they gone through the records? It's another thing. So researchers in the tribe are working at the site, and this one was run by the Catholic Church with federal government funding. Now, this guy, Eric Simmons, was working as an anthropologist for the University of British Columbia. He's been working with the tribe at the former school site, and researchers have been working on and off since 2014. So obviously they know something's been going on. The facility was destroyed back in the 1980s, and the location has been a challenge for both researchers and community. It was once the core and center of the main Sxwithul'txw town, so people live around that space. People had knowledge of missing children being buried in land, but didn't specify where their graves were located because it caused emotional and spiritual stress. Now, Steve, I can't pronounce that last name, sorry Steve, a member of the Sxwithul'txw tribe, was forced to attend the facility. He said he had relatives that would have died over there, so I'd like to know and think it's important they get a proper respect and burial they deserve. Fully agree. Let's do it. So I know some families want to identify their lost loved ones and bring them home in a proper way. So let's do that. Enough talk, let's do it. The federal government can pay for it. So in 2019, the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation released the names of almost 3,000 children who died in residential schools. And this place noticed 8 with the same last name he was born with. He said there are probably additional locations in and around the island that were used as burial grounds by the Catholic clergy that could still be searched. So let's get on with it. Well, it was nice to see the Catholic Church apologize on behalf of the Diocese of Victoria. And hopefully the Catholic Church can do better. And the Pope, once he's recovered from his own surgery, can issue an apology. It'd be better if the Pope himself came and witnessed it. But that's not how popes and politics work. Now, the archival records related to the school were handed over to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and are available at the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation. I wonder if that's online. Should look that one up. The British Columbia government said in June it's provided $12 million in support to investigate the former residential school sites, and Ottawa has pledged further support for the identification, investigation, and burial grounds near residential schools after allocating $27 million in 2019. So already we've been working on this since 2019. Now 2021, it's come out, and there's a huge uproar. It's like people didn't know. Come on. The First Nations people in Canada have always known. The Catholic Church knew. The government knew. And they're finally taking steps to rectify it, and now some social justice warrior nuts are making a big deal because they didn't know. They claim they didn't know. Shame on those people for stoking fires that didn't need to be lit. There's already enough tragedy in this as it is. So, Steve said the additional government funding is one step in the right direction, but he'll also like to see more government accountability. First Nations shouldn't have to be paying to find their children in any way, shape, or form. I don't see the Prime Minister doing much in reference to holding anyone to account other than, by dropping by and saying a few words and putting a teddy bear down. Yeah, photo op. Trudeau's photo op. Well, the problem is these things closed in 1970. Who's going to be alive? How many of these people are going to be alive that would be accountable? That's the only problem. A lot of these kids probably died between 1890 and 1940. That's when residential schools were particularly brutal, as well as orphanages, prisons, workhouses, anything like that. Remember the timeline, Steve. We had 2 world wars, a Great Depression, and it was just a different time period. Does it make it right? No, but you have to remember the context of what you're saying. Put it into historical context. First of all, you should be looking at the census records. You can find census records up to 1921. Do not the Indigenous reservations hold their own census records? Birth certificates? Death certificates? Well, if you find a birth certificate, you can't find where that person is. Follow a trail. There should be records of which residential school these kids went to and what happened afterwards. Remember, a lot of Indigenous communities turned away their own people who came back. because they were too white. So it's also on them too for not helping. It's not just a white colonial problem. It's also an Indigenous problem. They were part of the problem too. So Canada's going through the beginning stages of this public reckoning with their history of residential schools. Yeah, it's out in the open now for everyone to see what was already there. People knew about it, or a lot of people knew about it, but no one talked about it. Now we're being forced to talk about it. I just want to get it over with because it is one of those things that you can't change. You cannot go back in time. You can't fix the problem, but you can do something. There's got to be some way to do it. And they say more discoveries to come. I can bet you there will be more discoveries to come. So what happens? The new national chief calls for reparations for Indigenous people. Roseanne Archibald says redress must go beyond payments to residential school, day school, and 60 scoop survivors. Because we are paying the survivors. Now, if you can find the names of these children and where they came from, yes, you could compensate the parents. But, like I said, these kids, most of them probably died between 1890 and 1945. The vast majority. They're not going to have anybody still living. But what's it going to do? Throwing money at a problem is not going to help. We've been throwing money at the Indigenous communities for years to get their water supply fixed. The federal government has given money to the Indigenous peoples who have water problems to fix it. And for some reason, the money that gets earmarked for that never gets spent the way it should. I talked to a buddy of mine who does well drilling up in Northern Ontario and in Nunavut and in the Northwest. He's been all over Canada doing well drilling. He says that he's offered to go drill a couple of water wells in various Indigenous communities, and they refused. They refused his help. Why? Because there's no money in it, and it fixes a problem. So it's also on the Indigenous communities to let well drillers come in and do the job. For some reason, a lot of them don't want it. Now, Roseanne Archibald said settler colonization has had dire effects on Indigenous people in Canada, effects that continue to this day and demands redress. Well, of course, it was going to happen regardless. Settler colonialism was going to happen either way. If not by Canada, then it would have been the United States, and if not the United States, it would have been Russia, and then who knows what else. It could have been a lot worse. Think if it had been Islamic invaders, it would have really been bad. I'm thankful that we didn't entirely wipe out their culture. You have to remember we've already paid $3 billion, paid to 28,000 victims of residential school abuse. And they'll continue even as the compensation process draws to a close. Okay, so they're continuing to call for justice. Well, against who? Who's still alive? You could sue the government, but they're already getting up to $3 billion. Obviously, we put this in our school text. Get rid of critical race theory and put this in, the cultural genocide, but make sure you put everything in. My ancestors came as settlers in the 1830s, members of my family tree. But they came to an area that had no Indigenous people. Why? Because the Iroquois had already wiped them out. In the 17th century, the Iroquois rampaged through this area and killed the neutral Indigenous tribe. The survivors of that tribe fled into what is now Michigan and became the Wyandot. So where's the outrage over that one? The Mohawks sit on lands they stole from the neutral, the Petun, and the Huron. The Blackfoot tribe, they claim lands that were once the Shoshone. You know, they're not pure. They're not all pure themselves. Never think that. But the residential school policy did have a profound was a negative thing. It should have been better. It wasn't. The residential school policy was just terrible. It could have been done better, and it should have been done better. Now, reports of online abuses by lawyers, some residential school victims not being denied settlement, and these are things that keep getting brushed aside. Yes, there's going to be problems in the way it works out, but you got to remember throwing money at stuff is not the way to do it either. Now, according to this website on cultural and survival, Canada agrees to reparations for all residential school students as of May 30th. I'm not sure if it's this year. Doesn't say. Unprecedented policy for Canada. Previously, only former students were victims of sexual or physical abuse would receive monetary reparation. The earlier plan ignored the damage the schools caused to the suppression of native language and cultures. So now, we're going to give reparations to everybody. So the Canadian government suggested that reparations be based on recommendations outlined in November by the Assembly of First Nations. Lump sum payment to be made at least $10,000 per student plus $3,000 for each year each student spent in school. So if a student spent 10 years in school, they get $30,000 plus the $10,000 on top of that. Lump sum payment should not affect other claims for serious abuse, and individuals who already settled claims should still be eligible. Sick and elderly should receive their payments first, the Assembly's report said. Negotiations will determine how the reparations will be dispersed. So already we've taken that step in the right direction as far as a monetary reimbursement. Emotionally and mentally, it's never going to be the same. So we're already trying to do something, throwing money. Now you got to remember, money doesn't grow on trees. Here's my idea. You got to remember that in 2019, we gave $6.3 billion worldwide to other countries. Now, I am pretty sure we do not need to give $8 million to North Korea, $41 million to China, $3 million to Iran. We no longer need to give $197 million to Afghanistan. What a waste of money that was. Syria, $150 million? Forget that. Jordan, $118 million? I know we give money to, doesn't list it here, but we do give money to the Gaza Strip. I think it was $50 million. And to the West Bank, we give another so much money. Yemen, $72 million. Pakistan, $63.6 million. We don't need to give them that. There are so many countries that I would just take the funding out, because throwing money at the problems there has never worked. They keep coming back for more money. Ethiopia, $203 million. I remember when Live Aid was a thing in 1984, 85. How much money have we put into that? Ethiopia. So all these little countries, I can easily take $2 billion out of this and throw it and give it to our Indigenous people. Anyway, any Canadians out there, let me know what you guys think of this whole reparations idea. And until next time, this has been the Great White North Report.